All right, once again, welcome to day one of our 22-23 LCAP Workshop. And this is Bonnie McFarland, and we're here with our team today. You'll be hearing from all of them: Adrian Balcazar, Debbie Cano, Rachel Garcia, and Jeannie Keith. And also we have two new coordinators joining our team, Helen Choi and Anita Lomeli, and you'll be hearing from them in some of our future meetings. So welcome. And just before we get started, just let you know, you'll find the link to the slides. I believe that's in the chat, yes. And the meeting slides are posted there. There are also some resources posted there, and you will also find after the meeting is done and we have time to get it posted, the meeting will be recorded and posted on that website. So let's get started and look at our agenda for today. So today we're going to look at where we are with the LCAP cycle, and we'll review the template and the changes for the upcoming submission. We'll also review the requirements for local indicators, and we'll briefly take a look at the timeline and approval process. Day two of the workshop will be on February 2nd, when we'll go more in depth into the changes for this year and some of the more challenging areas in the plan. You'll find more information for day two on the last slide. So when you download that, there's a link and some information about day two. So hopefully we will see you then. So let's take a look at how we're going to proceed. Questions? Many of you know our process. We ask you to put your questions in the chat. And as usual, we'll follow up with a Q&A regarding your questions. And in some cases, we may have to check on answers, may not have answers yet. So some things are still rolling out. But please put your questions in the chat, and we will send out the Q&A to all the participants. So we'll look forward to seeing those. All right. Jumping right in, let's look at a little short overview, and just to provide you a context for the rest of the presentation. So let's back up a year now. Not that you want to relive this, all right, but if you look on the next slide, we're going to take a look at 21-22 and the LCAP. We're going to start with a review of last year's LCAP because it was a foundational year for the LCAP, and there were significant changes in addition to that. We also wanted to do a brief review because last year may seem like a blur to many of you. Schools were both opening and closing at the time you were developing your LCAP, and district administrators were responding to multiple new funding sources. You had plans that you had to submit. And honestly, some of you told us you were really trying to pay attention and understand, but you were so inundated that you were pulled in many directions and you really couldn't be as focused as you wanted to be. So we understand that. And to make it worse, last year was not just a new template, it was the first year of a new 3-year plan cycle. So it was especially important to get it right, because anything that wasn't right was going to continue to haunt you for the next several years. So as a result of all these circumstances, the approval process last year extended longer than usual for many districts. So we're hoping for a smoother year this year. Some of the changes last year included those listed on the slide, and some were format changes, and others were new sections that were added, such as the 2 expenditure tables that were added. While some of the changes, in fact, most of them are ongoing, for example, the 2 expenditure tables that were added, the total and contributing, those are ongoing and will be included from now on in this 3-year cycle. But some of them are one-time submissions, and that again added to the complexity last year. You had primarily, that was the 2 annual updates you had to submit last year. The first was 1920, and that was challenging because you were looking at 2-year-old data. So it was challenging to do that one. And then you also had to do the 2021 Learning Continuity Plan, and that had its own challenges because it was unlike the LCAP in format and content, and so doing the annual update on it was really an unfamiliar process. Another change that we'll be working with this year is and it was in the template last year, but you didn't really have to work with it. You'll be seeing it this year, and that's the annual update, which is now embedded in the template. And we'll take a look at that later. A couple of other changes were a new requirement for English learners last year. That was the first year to describe the English learner services. And then also there were additional changes in the instructions for the increased or improved services requirement that were very challenging. So it was a challenging year, and some of these were one time, and some of them will be ongoing. So let's take a look at 22, 23. And so the LCAP you're going to be submitting this year, keep in mind, this will be year 2 of your 3-year plan cycle. So you submitted your initial plan last year. This will be your year 2. There are a couple new elements in last year's template that you'll be addressing for the first time this year. As I mentioned, the first is the annual update. Instead of being a separate, distinct section, the annual update's now embedded in the goals and actions section and in the action tables. So this will be the first year you'll be working with that. You will now be completing some of the boxes that were blank last year. I know there were some boxes that you weren't completing, for example, in the outcomes, and it was uncomfortable to leave those empty. Well, now you'll be reporting on some of those. So you'll be reporting on outcomes toward your 3-year goal. So how are you doing in year 1 toward those outcomes you established last year? So those are all changes that took place last year, but you didn't really have to work with them. Then there are a couple of new requirements based on new legislation. The first only applies to a very few districts, and that is that for some DA districts who have consistently low-performing student groups or consistently low-performing schools based on state criteria, there is a requirement for them to have specific goals to address the needs of those schools or those student groups, and we'll be working with those districts to support them in that work. Another new requirement is the calculation for carryover for costs for increased or improved services, and this triggers multiple new requirements within the template, most of which we'll address in day 2. So let's look at what is going to be submitted. First, these are the components that are going to be in the plan. The first, the budget overview for parents, will be submitted as it has been in the past along with your LCAP. The template for the new budget overview for parents has not yet been posted. We anticipate there will be some changes to reflect new legislation, but essentially it will be pretty much what you've submitted in the past. The second, and this is going to be a one-time submission, and that is the supplement to the annual update to the LCAP. This is the update that you're required to present to your local board by this February 28th. Because this is a one-time point-in-time report, there's no requirement to update or revise that supplement. Once you've presented it to the board, it's just part of the submission, and we don't anticipate any type of content review. It will be reviewed for the fact that you did it. It may be part of the audit process to see that you did it, and you did it based on the timeline. But as for the content, there's no change. It's just a one-time report to your board that's submitted with your LCAP. So that'll be new, and that's a one-time. The LCAP template includes the 4 sections listed there, and we'll be going through each of those today. Most of them are pretty familiar to you. So the summary, the description of how you're engaging your partners, your educational partners, your goals, actions, and then the increased or improved services requirement. And then finally, the submission will include multiple action tables, including the last 2, which are new based on new legislation. So the first are included in the template, the first 2. The next, the annual update, will be an additional table you'll be completing, and then there are 2 new tables that will be included. So we'll look at these again later in the presentation. If you're looking for where to find the requirements for the LCAP, we can give you 3 resources. Education Code describes the required components and the development and approval processes for the LCAP. So if you're looking for the process for developing, what's required, all of that, are in those EdCode sections. Also, the California Code of Regulations includes regulations that were adopted by the State Board of Education, and these govern the spending regulations for the increased or improved services requirements for your 3 identified student groups. Finally, we included the instructions because Education Code identifies that the approval criteria for the LCAP and specifies that one of those is adherence to the template, and CDE has clarified that adherence to the template includes adherence to the instructions to the template. So the instructions are another important component addressing the approval criteria. All right, so we wanted to give you a quick 1, 2, 3 on a formula for LCAP success. And we think these are some of the foundational things that will help you. And the first is that adherence to the principles of LCFF. If you think about the bottom line, local control funding formula was about equity, it's about transparency, and it's about accountability. If you start with that and you stay focused on that, that's a good start and you're likely to get to the right place. Next, including goals and actions and services for all students in all state priority areas. The one thing we often see, people are under the misperception that this is just a plan for your 3 unduplicated pupil groups. This is a plan for all students in all state priority areas. So think of it as a comprehensive plan for all students. Next, encouraging educational partners and engaging them in meaningful discussions throughout the year, not just as the plan is being developed. It's not a one-time meeting at the end of the year, hey, is this okay? Meaningful engagement means you're communicating with your stakeholders. Our new word is educational partners, but you're engaging with them throughout the year in a meaningful way. Next thing to keep in mind is making it clear and understandable to any reader. Spell out acronyms. I know we hear, well, our people understand it. Well, it's those people who are reading it may not be the people who are in the groups that come to meetings and that attend things all the time. Any parent or any outside organization needs to be able to read it and know what you're talking about. Make sure your actions are discrete and actionable. Can anyone tell what's happening, and is it clear or is it confusing? And then read and follow the instructions, not just the prompts. We can't say that often enough. And keep in mind the instructions, which are in the back of the plan. And when you read, and back of the template, I'm sorry, but when you read and follow the instructions, keep in mind there's often multiple criteria within that. You have one sentence, but it may be a very long sentence with a lot of pieces to it. Often what happens is people address the big idea, but they miss some of the pieces. So read them carefully and address the instructions. And then finally, when you're writing your actions, base them on the needs of individual student groups, especially your contributing actions. Okay, keep in mind, unduplicated pupils doesn't constitute a group. There's no such thing as an unduplicated pupil. There are pupils with specific needs, and each of those groups should be addressed. So what are the needs of English learners? What are the needs of your low-income students? And what are the needs of your foster youth for your contributing actions? And how are you writing your actions to address those needs? So that's kind of our 1, 2, 3, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for LCAP success. The next slide gives you a resource that you'll find on our website, and it's a template with the instructions embedded. One of the challenges is that the instructions are at the end of the template, and so when writing it, you have to be going back and forth and looking at them, and that's one reason sometimes things get missed. So you don't just read the prompt. This is a sample with the instructions embedded right there. So while you're writing it, you can see exactly what the full instructions say. And again, they're posted on our website. Before the team goes into the details, I wanted to leave you with this quote, and it's from the instructions actually, and it provides in one paragraph a summary of what the LCAP is really intended to be. And I think it's worth reading because it encapsulates the principles of equity, transparency, and accountability in one paragraph. And based on the instructions, it says at its most basic, the adopted LCAP should attempt to distill not just what the LEA is doing for students in TK through grade 12, but also allow educational partners to understand why and whether those strategies are leading to improved opportunities and outcomes for students. LEAs are strongly encouraged to use language and a level of detail in their adopted LCAPs intended to be meaningful and accessible for the LEA's diverse educational partners, and you'll notice there it says, and the broader public. Okay. So you see this reflected throughout the LCAP. You notice it talks about not just the what, but the why, which you see in the explanation of why did the LEA develop each goal, and how are the actions contributing to increased or improved services designed to address the needs of those student groups. Whether strategies are leading to improved opportunities and outcomes. And notice opportunities and outcomes, not one or the other. This is reflected in outcomes, but it's also reflected in the goal analysis, the action descriptions. And is the plan meaningful and accessible to educational partners and also the broader community, which is why it's important enough for anyone to understand easily. With that, we're going to move on and look in more detail at the template, starting with the plan summary. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, I believe.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Bonnie mentioned, next we're going to be taking a look at the first section of the LCAP template, which is the plan summary. Next slide, please. So there are 5 components within the plan summary section. And this includes the general information, the reflections on successes, reflections on identified need, LCAP highlights, and also the comprehensive support and improvement prompts. The purpose of the plan summary section is to provide a meaningful context for the LCAP, to provide information about the LEA's community, and relevant information about student needs and performance. In order to provide a meaningful context for the rest of the LCAP, the content of this section should be clearly and meaningfully related to the content included in the subsequent sections of the LCAP. Next slide, please. So 2 changes have been made to the plan summary section, and the first change is in the general information prompt. So the general information prompt and the corresponding instructions have been slightly revised. So the prompt originally read a description of the LEA, its schools, and its students. And so the piece that says in grades transitional kindergarten through 12 as applicable to the LEA was added to the prompt this year. For this prompt, LEAs will need to provide the reader with information about the LEA, such as the students and the community, enrollment and employment information, the number and size of specific schools, and recent community challenges. So a key question to consider when completing this section is what information would enable a reader to more fully understand the LEA's LCAP? Next slide, please. For this section, LEAs are asked to describe the progress they are most proud of and how they plan to maintain or build upon that success based on a review of available state and local data. And this could include progress toward LCAP goals, local self-assessment tools, input from educational partners, and any other information. And so LEAs may also include specific examples of how past increases or improvements in services for foster youth, English learners, and low-income students have led to the improved performance for these students. Next slide, please. For the reflections identified needs section, LEAs are asked to identify their needs based on a review of available state and local data, including input from educational partners. LEAs may also identify needs based on locally collected data used to inform the local indicator self-reflection tools and reporting local indicators in the dashboard. In addition to identifying the needs, LEAs must also describe the steps that they are planning to take to address those areas of need. And something that is new for this section is that the identified need prompt has been revised to include a specific requirement for the LEAs that are required to include a specific goal in their LCAP to address one or more consistently low-performing student groups or low-performing schools. So in the response to this prompt, these LEAs must identify that they are required to include a specific goal and must also identify the applicable student groups and/or schools being addressed. And this new requirement only applies to 7 LEAs within LA County at this time. And we've included the link to the CDE information memo that provides additional information, as well as a list of the LEAs that this requirement applies to. Next slide, please. So in the LCAP highlights section, LEAs are asked to identify and briefly summarize key features of this year's LCAP. This is the place to capture, in a snapshot, what's to come. It's a hook to invite the readers to read the rest of the LCAP. And so a recommendation for this section is to complete it at the end, after you've completed the other sections of the LCAP. Next slide, please. So the last section in the plan summary section are the CSI prompts. So when completing this section, LEAs would first provide the names of the identified CSI schools. The second prompt asks for a description of how the LEA supported the CSI school in developing their CSI plan. So this description would include how the LEA supported the CSI school with conducting a school-level needs assessment and data analysis, identifying evidence-based interventions, and also identifying any resource inequities to be addressed through the plan. The last CSI prompt asks for a description of how the LEA will monitor and evaluate the implementation of the CSI plan, as well as how the LEA will monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the plan. And that concludes the plan summary section. So I will now turn it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. So my section here is engaging educational partners. And so this section is now known as engaging educational partners, and it was formerly referred to as stakeholder engagement. For those of you who are not aware or heard about this change, the reason for the change is that the state received feedback from different Native American groups that the term stakeholder had a negative connotation within their community. Therefore, the CDE has ceased to use the term stakeholder and are now using educational partners anywhere where that was used, not just for the LCAP, but across the state and other plans. Next slide, please. Okay, so the process for engaging educational partners. As you can see, there's a graphic here with the different groups that the process. First, it's a consultation. So the LCAP should be shared with and request input from different groups, from the advisory committees at the school site level, the school site council, the ELAC, or different student advisory groups. And there should be an alignment between the school site and the district level goals and actions. The school site plans should also reflect the LCAP. They should be coordinated in conjunction with one another. The review of the school plans is done by the district or the county office. And then there's also a consultation with the SELPA. So this is for our district and county offices to consult with our SELPA administrators to determine the specific actions for individuals with exceptional needs and make sure that those are included in the LCAP, and that make sure that our actions and strategies are in the annual assurances to support the plan for the education of individuals with exceptional needs. So then we go through this consultation part. We go then through a public hearing, then a public meeting for adoption. So and their input process is throughout, and then the adoption of the LCAP. And this is like an accordion process. It's not consult one time, but you go back and forth with your educational partners, getting input, making revisions, getting input through that process. And the deeply you engage in that process, the easier it is going to be to complete this section. Next slide, please. So the required educational partners, there are groups that are required to be consulted for the LCAP annually. So the groups that are required for districts and charters are teachers, administrators, parents, principals, other school personnel, and students. Local bargaining units are for districts only, and SELPA administrators are for districts and for charters if they are using the LCAP as their SPSA or their SIPSA. The district advisory committees that are required to be consulted are the Parent Advisory Committee and the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, or your DLAC. The superintendent is to present the LCAP to each of these groups, and they are then to review the LCAP draft and give opportunity, the superintendent gives opportunity for questions and comments from the groups, and those questions or comments will be responded to by the superintendent in writing. Next slide, please. So the reason for the purpose to engage our partners, our educational partners, is that significant and purposeful engagement of parents, students, and other partners, including those representing the student groups identified in the LCFF. It's critical in the development of the LCAP and the budget process. It is consistent with the statute and comprehensive strategic planning, accountability, and improvement across the state priorities and locally identified priorities. These should be supported throughout meaningful engagement of the educational partners. Engagement of educational partners is ongoing and indeed through an annual process. Next slide, please. This section is designed to reflect how engagement with educational partners influenced the decisions and reflected in the adopted LCAP. The goal is to allow educational partners that participated in the LCAP development process, as well as the broader public, to understand how the LEA engaged its educational partners and the impact that they had on the plan. LEAs are encouraged to keep these goals in mind in the forefront as they plan. And so just think about this, that the section is really designed to demonstrate the partnership that should be the foundation of the plan. So this is your opportunity to demonstrate how the principles of transparency, equity, and accountability have guided the development of the plan. Okay, next slide. So here we have a screenshot of the 3 prompts within this section, and we're going to go through each one of them. Next slide. So for prompt 1, as stated earlier, I think Bonnie said that the prompt is for the reader and the instructions is for the writer. So for those of you writing this plan, you can see the difference there. The prompt is that top part in the lighter pink, a summary of the process used to engage educational partners and how this engagement was considered before finalizing the LCAP. But what the instructions are far more detailed there. And what the instructions are asking for is really to describe the process that the LEA used to involve the educational partners. They want, at a minimum, describe how we met with all of the statutory required educational partners. So if you think about that slide of all those folks that were required to be, how did you engage your principals, your unions, your students? We want a description here. A sufficient response to this prompt is going to include general information about your timeline of your process, the meetings, if you did surveys, other engagement strategies that you use, all of that would be described here and who you met with. So who you met with and how it happened. This response may also include information about your philosophical approach to engaging educational partners. Next slide, please. So here, prompt 2, a summary of feedback provided by specific educational partners. Now here, a sufficient response to this prompt is going to indicate the ideas or trends and input that emerged from the analysis of the feedback received from your educational partners. And here you want to summarize what was important and to which groups it was important. So it's not just what was part of the LCAP, but you might have other things that were prioritized by groups, but that maybe are more broadly addressed. But you want to make sure that you acknowledge the input that was given by the different groups. And then, so you think about it, salaries might be very important to a union, but to parents of English learners, language development would be important. And so what was the input from the different groups? And you want to describe and detail that here. Next slide, please. Okay. And prompt 3, a description of the aspects of the LCAP that were influenced by specific input from the educational partners. So here we want what the different, if your LCAP, which goals were influenced by which input, and the different funds amounts, or if say you want parents wanted MTSS and you wanted counselors, this is where you would detail those specific aspects of the LCAP that were influenced by your stakeholder feedback. Oh, pardon me, I said it too, sorry, Bonnie. Your educational partners, it's hard to keep going, you go back to using that word that you've used for so long, I apologize. Okay, next section is going to be Adrian. Oh, I'm sorry if I went past all of that, but that was the same thing. This is a lot of information about what I just, this is all of the determination of effectiveness. This is what you're going to summarize from the educational partners' input for your LCAP. Okay, Adrian.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here to share on the goals and actions. So this next section, I'm going to cover in the LCAP template are the goals and actions. So here is what the goals and actions template looks like. It has not changed from last year's template. Here you will be providing for each goal that you have, the goal, the metrics, and the action descriptions. Here is the goal analysis part of the template. Last year, as Bonnie had mentioned, you left this blank and you completed the annual update using partially the 1720 LCAP template and the Learning Continuity Plan annual update. So this time, the annual update for the 21-22 school year with those actions and goals and metrics will all be addressed here in the goal analysis section. And you can see we'll go in depth a little bit later in my presentation. So the first part of the goals and action section is the goal. So here you will number each goal. You'll provide a description of what the LEA is planning to accomplish, planning to do, and how you will know when you have accomplished this goal. And the next part of this section is to provide an explanation of why the LEA has developed a goal. This is the why. For example, you might start off stating, we've developed this goal based on, and you can include here the analysis of student data, perhaps student educational partners feedback, I apologize, and et cetera, other reasons why you have developed this goal. The LCFF-State priorities are foundational for your LCAP. The goals, actions, and expenditures should be prioritized within one or more of the state priorities. And the LEAs should be using the data on the performance of the state and local indicators, especially during these years right now in the locally collected and reported data for the local indicators that are in the dashboard. You know, it's very critical right now as with the absence of data that the locally collected data is also as critical right now until we have that data gap closed. And so you will utilize all of these to prioritize your goals within the LCAP. And the instructions state that at minimum, the LCAP must address all LCFF priorities and associated metrics. So this is important that your LCAP has addressed all of the priorities that apply to you compared to a county office that has more. I should clarify that. In order to support this prioritization of goals, the LCAP template provides LEAs with the option of developing 3 different kinds of goals. And as you see here, you can have a focus goal, a broad goal, or a maintenance of progress goal. And it is not required to identify in the goal description which goal you have developed, but because of the specific formatting of the goal, it pretty much determines the type. However, sometimes it is helpful for your educational partners if you state it. However, it is not required. So as you can see in the definitions, the focus goal is a goal that is more concentrated in scope and may focus on a fewer number of metrics to measure improvement. It could be focused on a specific student group. A focus goal statement will be time-bound, and it makes very clear how the goal is to be measured. The second type of goal is the broad goal, and this is a goal that is less concentrated in its scope and may focus on improving performance across a wide range of metrics. So the broad goal here, it could be for all students and will address those things that are ongoing or long-term. And then the third choice or type of goal is the maintenance of progress goal. It is a goal that includes actions that may be ongoing without significant changes. So this will allow the LEA to track the performance of any metric that's perhaps not addressed in any other goals of the LCAP. For example, an LEA may have all teachers properly credentialed, buildings are in good repair, and students all have their textbooks. So this current level of maintenance is adequate and does not look to improve. So the goal is just simply to maintain. So again, this is your choice as you are developing your goals. As a new requirement that was added to the 22-23 LCAP for certain LEAs is the inclusion of these goals for the certain districts that have been identified under Senate Bill 98. As Rachel mentioned, these identified LEAs must describe the clear connection between the LEA's performance and the planning process of how they are addressing the needs of the consistently low performing student groups and or addressing the needs of low performing schools within their district. So these identified LEAs are required to include a specific goal in the 22-23 LCAP. It also is to be included in the reflections, the identified need portion, as shown before, in the LCAP plan summary. And the LEA must identify the student groups and or schools that this goal is addressing. And also it is stated in the instructions that if an LEA has both of these groups that are qualified, you cannot combine the goal. You must have 2 separate actions, so 2 separate goals to address this. The next section is the measuring and reporting results. Here, the metrics are used to track the progress towards the expected outcomes of your goal. So you will include metrics for significant student groups and include the expected outcomes that would reflect the narrowing of existing performance gaps. And since this is year 2 of the 3-year template, your baseline column included is the most recent data available at the time of adoption of your LCAP. So if you are adding a new metric for the 22-23, again, you're going to include the most recent data available. And for existing metrics, remember your baseline must remain unchanged throughout the 3-year cycle and 3-year plan. Here is the metric table with more specific information and details. For the 22-23 LCAP, again, you will be providing the information in year 1 outcomes column as indicated with a star. Also note, you must include the school year of the data that is used in this column. Next is the description of the actions. The actions included in your LCAP are for all students and specifically identified student groups to achieve the state and local priorities. The action description should clearly state who or what the action will target and how it will move the LEA towards its goal. Lastly, your actions are designed based on the needs of the identified students in which the actions were created for. Here is the action description table with the instructions embedded in each column within this template. Some key points to note is that there is a requirement to include specific actions for student groups. So if you have a numerically significant number of EL students, which is 30, you must include actions for English learners that address the language acquisition programs provided to students and the professional development activities specific to English learners. So that is a legal requirement that you have actions that describe that and address that. And if you have a significant number of foster youth, it is highly encouraged to include specific actions in your LCAP designed to meet their specific needs. So again, those are some key points to point out. And then in the total funds column, you will find here, you will include the total amount of the expenditures associated with each action. And for the contributing column here, you will indicate a Y or an N for yes or no if you are indicating that the action is contributing or not contributing to the specific needs, conditions, or circumstances of your low-income foster youth and or English learners. And here we have a screenshot of the action tables that are to show the connection to the total planned expenditure table and the contributing action table. Here, there are additional action details that you have collected and you have determined in the development and design of your actions. And so these will be reflected in the data entry table, and they are displayed in these two tables. So they are connected, and together they tell the story. The next section of the goals and actions template is the goal analysis. This is what was formerly titled the annual update of the current year's actions and expenditures. There are 4 prompts that must be addressed. And these prompts, as you see them, are similar to the annual update prompts in the 21-22 LCAP, but the location is placed after the 22-23 goals and actions. So again, the position of it is in a different place. But here you are providing a description of any substantive differences in your planned action and your actual implementation of the action. Also looking at explanation of material differences between the budgeted and the estimated actuals for increased or improved services, and then an explanation of how effective the specific actions were in making progress towards the goal. And so everything is all linked. And then the last prompt is, again, looking and reflecting on describing any changes that are going to be made in your 22-23 plan goals, metrics, desired outcomes, or actions. So based on the reflection of what you have found out through your goal analysis of your actions for the 21-22 school year. So again, here is showing that when you are filling out and addressing all of the prompts in your goal analysis, again, now these particular tables are connected to the annual update table, to the contributing actions annual update table, and the LCFF carryover table. And now Jeannie will continue with the increased or improved services section of the LCAP template.
Thank you, Adrienne, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So let's go to the next slide, please. And so we'll start the increased or improved services section with this purpose statement that's included in the instructions. And the instructions include this purpose of the increased or improved service section, which really, this information reflects the transparency and focus on equity of outcomes for the 3 unduplicated student groups in the LCAP. And here you can see a well-written increased or improved services section will connect to the contributing actions included in the plan and will describe for educational partners how the LEA plans to increase or improve services for their ELs, their English learners, their low income and foster youth, and will explain how the contributing actions being provided district-wide and or school-wide are designed to address these students' unique needs and how these services will be measured for effectiveness. Next slide, please. Within this section of the template, which you see displayed on the screen, there's fiscal information that's used to calculate the proportional increase in funding apportioned for these 3 student groups. In the top row, LEAs provide the projected supplemental and concentration grants that all LEAs received based on their enrollment of English learners, low income, and foster youth. And the additional new 15% add-on concentration grant that was provided for districts and charter schools with enrollment of unduplicated pupils that is greater than 55%. In the second row, we see included a new area for percentages that reflect the proportional increase in funds received for the LCAP year, as well as the new requirement for the percentage and dollar amount of carryover, which reflects funds that were not used for contributing actions in the prior year LCAP. Together, these percentages provide the total percentage required for the LEA to increase or improve services in the coming school year. Additionally, there are 3 prompts that require description that connects to the contributing actions that are included in the LCAP. Next slide, please. The instructions included in this section provide the calculations for the amounts that need to be included in the top row of the LCAP template and the calculations for the related percentages. The new component here is the additional concentration grant funding that is provided to LEAs with high concentrations enrollment of students in the 3 unduplicated pupil groups. Next slide, please. And here we see the instructions for the percentage and dollar amount for carryover that is included in the new carryover tables. If a carryover percentage and or dollar amount is not identified in the carryover table, then the LEA indicates 0% and is $0 amount as carryover. Per the instructions, LEAs calculate their total percentage by which the LEA must provide services that are increased or improved as compared to services they are providing for all students in the LCAP year. LEAs add the projected percentage to increase or improve services for the coming year with the proportional carryover percentage to determine their total percentage to increase or improve services in the coming year. This calculation maintains the LCFF spending regulations as in prior years and includes for the first year the percentage of LCFF carryover of funds for contributing actions from the prior year LCAP. Next slide, please. For the requirement to increase or improve services that is found in Ed Code and in the Title V spending regulations, we see that accordingly, LEAs are required to demonstrate in their LCAP how they are increasing or improving services for students who are low income, English learner, and or foster youth as compared to services provided for all students. The LEA's LCAP contributing actions must show how they are increasing services, which means growing services in quantity, or in other words, providing more or additional services, as well as how they are improving the quality of services for each of the 3 student groups. Next slide, please. So how is this requirement met? An LEA meets the requirement to increase or improve services by demonstrating how their contributing actions increase the quantity and or improve the quality of services as compared to services provided to all students. And the way in which the LEA provides the demonstration starts with the contributing actions the LEA designs to address the unique needs of their English learners, low income, and foster youth. Next slide, please. Excuse me, I need to turn off my phone. So here the LEA starts their demonstration by identifying which actions in their LCAP are contributing to the increased or improved services requirement. Next slide, please. The demonstration of how an LEA is meeting the requirement to increase or improve services is found in 3 places within the LCAP template. The goals and actions section displayed on the screen is where the LEA provides and describes their contributing actions. On the next slide, we see, as Adrian previously shared, the action tables that provide the funding component and student group and location information related to actions provided to all students and specific students groups, as well as the additional actions identified as contributing in the action tables. And on the next slide, we see the 3rd place where LEAs demonstrate how they are increasing services for their unduplicated student groups through 3 descriptions that are required in the increased or improved services section. We'll take a look on the next slide at each of these 3 required descriptions. And each of these descriptions connects or is part of a prompt that connects to the contributing actions the LEA designed in the goals and actions section. And these descriptions provide information that reflects how the contributing action provides additional quantity of service or improved quality of services that address the unique needs in the LEA. Prompt 1 addresses contributing actions that an LEA is providing on an LEA-wide or school-wide basis. Prompt 2 describes the LEA's increase or improvement in services by the required percentage. And prompt 3 is new, and this addresses the use of the additional concentration grant funding for direct school level services. Now we'll go into each of the prompts, beginning with prompt 1. Prompt 1 aligns to each LEA-wide or school-wide contributing action that is included in the action tables. For each of these actions, the LEA must explain how it is principally directed and effected for the intended student groups. To do this, an LEA first describes how it considers the needs, conditions, or circumstance of its unduplicated pupils. Then, how the action or aspects of the action are based on these considerations. And then, how the action is intended to help achieve an expected measurable outcome of the associated goal. Next slide, please. Additionally, for prompt 1, for any LEA-wide or school-wide services that are being provided where there is an unduplicated pupil percentage of less than 55% LEA-wide or less than 40% school-wide, these descriptions must explain how the actions being provided are the most effective use of the funds to meet its goals for the intended student groups. On the next slide, additional information that is included in the instructions is provided. This identifies that descriptions in this section cannot include conclusory statements that claim a service will help achieve an expected outcome for the goal without explaining what will occur. Or the description cannot simply state that an action is principally directed and effective for English learners, low income, and or foster youth without providing the required explanation. Additionally, the instructions clarify that stating that an LEA has a high enrollment percentage of a specific student group does not explain how the service is uniquely designed to address the additional needs of the intended student group and how it will be effective for the intended student group. All right, that's it for prompt 1. Prompt 2. Prompt 2 connects to all the contributing actions included in the LEA's action tables. These are LEA-wide actions, school-wide actions, and or limited actions. So the description in this section must address how all of these actions are expected to result in the proportional increase or improvement in services that was calculated at the top of this section. And so, consistent with the spending regulations, LEAs must describe how services provided for unduplicated pupils are increased or improved by at least the percentage calculated as compared to services provided for all students in the LCAP year. And again, the instructions note in this section that to improve services means to grow services in quality, and to increase services means to grow services in quantity. Okay, so this should be articulated in the response to prompt 2. Next slide, please. Prompt 2 also includes a new component in this year's template, which addresses any action contributing to meeting the increased or improved services requirement that is associated with a planned percentage of improved services in the contributing actions table rather than an expenditure of LCFF funds. These are limited actions that an LEA may include in their LCAP with 0 funding. For these actions, if any are included in the LCAP, the LEA must describe the methodology that was used to determine the contribution of the action towards the proportional percentage. This new percentage of improved services for a limited action corresponds to the amount of LCFF funding that an LEA estimates it would expend to implement the action if it included funding. This is a new concept, and our Day 2 training will address how an LEA would calculate this percentage for any limited contributing action it may include that does not include any funds. Again, this percentage is based on the amount of funds the LEA estimates it would have spent if funding were included in the action. Next slide, please. This new prompt 3 applies to any LEA that receives the additional concentration add-on grant. And for these LEAs that are receiving the additional concentration add-on grant, they're required to demonstrate how the LEA will use these funds to specifically increase the number of staff who provide direct services to students at schools with an enrollment of unduplicated students that is greater than 55%, as compared to the number of staff who provide direct services to students at schools with an enrollment of unduplicated students that is equal to or less than 55%. The staff who provide direct services for students must be certificated staff and or classified staff employed by the LEA. And classified staff may include custodial staff. It is noted that an LEA that does not receive a concentration grant must indicate that in their, as a response to this prompt. So they must indicate that this prompt is not applicable to them. Per the instructions for eligible LEAs, LEAs will provide the following descriptions that are applicable to the LEA. First, the LEA will identify the goal and action numbers of the actions in the LCAP that the LEA is implementing to meet the requirement to increase the number of staff who provide direct services to students at schools with an enrollment of unduplicated pupils that's greater than 55%. The instructions indicate that an LEA does not have comparison schools from which to describe how it is using the concentration grant add-on funds, such as an LEA that only has an enrollment of unduplicated students that is greater than 55%, must describe how it's using its funds to increase the number of credentialed staff, classified staff, or both, including custodial staff, who provide direct services to students at selected schools, and the criteria used to determine which schools require additional staffing support. If the additional concentration add-on grant is not sufficient to increase staff providing direct services to students at a school with an enrollment of greater than 55% unduplicated pupils, the LEA must describe how it is using these funds to retain staff providing direct services to students at a school with an enrollment of unduplicated pupils that is greater than 55%. Next slide, please. The second component for prompt 3 is a table. And here there are two components in this table. First, providing the FTE for staff at schools with less than 55% and at schools with greater than 55% based on census day. The LEA will show the ratio of classified staff as well as the ratio of certificated staff at schools with less than 55% unduplicated pupils and schools with greater than 55% unduplicated pupils. At the bottom of the slide, you see the instructions which articulate how to provide the FTE information. The instructions also indicate that an LEA may group its schools by grade span, such as elementary, middle, and high, in determining their calculations. And they may provide those ratios by grade span or by the LEA in total. And so this chart, which provides the ratio, accompanies the description provided about how the LEA is using these funds to provide staffing who provide direct services at the school level. Direct services for students at the school level. And on the next slide, we're going to quickly take a look at a brief overview of the action tables. And you've heard this a couple times already, but the action tables are really connected to the sections included in the LCAP template. And so here's a brief overview of the tables that are included in the new template and the purpose of these tables. So overall, these tables help to identify the fiscal resources being used to implement the actions in the LCAP. And the tables also are a tool to clearly communicate to educational partners how the LEA is using their funds, where and what funds are being used to address needs of specific students and specific needs that the LEA has identified through their process. And also, the tables demonstrate how the LEA is meeting their requirement to increase or improve services for each of the unduplicated pupil groups. On the next slide, we'll take a look at just some of the changes in the action tables that are in the new LCAP. And previously, the tables were called expenditures tables, and the tables included in the LCAP now are referred to as action tables. And the tables address actions in the LCAP planned for the coming year, as well as actions that were included in the approved LCAP for the 21, from the approved 21-22 LCAP. And the next slide provides a visual of the templates, action tables that will be included in your submission for the 22-23 LCAP. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to continue with the local indicators section.
Thank you, Jeannie. Next slide. So what are the local indicators? So for LCFF priorities, where data is not collected at the state level, an LEA must measure and report its progress through the dashboard based on locally collected data. Local indicators provide valuable information necessary for educational partners to engage in meaningful engagement with a holistic understanding of local successes as well as challenges. And it also informs the LCAP planning process. It's important to note that the local indicators apply to all county offices of education, school districts, and charter schools. Next slide, please. So here on this slide, we see the local indicators that LEAs must measure progress and report on annually based on locally collected data. And so this includes basic services and conditions for priority 1, implementation of state academic standards for priority 2. Priority 3 is parent and family engagement, school climate for priority 6, and priority 7, access to a broad course of study. And the last 2 local indicators listed only apply to county offices of education. Next slide, please. So here are the state board approved performance standards for the local indicators that support LEAs in measuring and reporting their progress within the appropriate priority area. So for each local indicator, LEAs must annually measure its progress, report the results as part of a non-consent item at a regularly scheduled public meeting of the local governing board, And this must also be the same meeting at which the LCAP is adopted. And then the third item is to report the results to the public through the dashboard using the state board adopted self-reflection tools. Next slide, please. If an LEA satisfies the 3 performance standards noted on the previous slide for a local indicator, then the LEA will receive a performance rating of MET in the dashboard for that local indicator. However, if an LEA does not meet all 3 performance standards for a local indicator, then the LEA will receive a performance rating of not met or not met for 2 or more years as applicable in the dashboard. It's also important to note that you don't see a performance rating in the 2021 dashboard, as the requirement to apply the met or not met rating was suspended for 2021. However, the CDE has indicated that this will reappear with the 2022 dashboard. Next slide, please. So here are just a few important steps to consider as you're preparing to measure progress for each local indicator. So first, you'll want to make sure that you're familiar with each of the local indicators and the self-reflection tools. Next, it will be important to determine what data needs to be collected and also what process you're going to use to collect that data. Once the data has been collected and analyzed, you'll use the findings to report progress through the self-reflection tools, as well as to determine the needs of the LEA in order to inform the development of the LCAP. Next slide. So an LEA uses the self-reflection tools included within the dashboard to report its progress on the local performance indicator to its educational partners and the public. And the collection and reflection on locally available data will support LEAs in completing the self-reflection tools, reporting in the dashboard, and also in local planning and improvement efforts. The self-reflection tools are available on the CDE website in the Local Performance Indicator Quick Guide. And the CDE has indicated that the Quick Guide was updated last month, and the link to this guide is included on the slide. Next slide, please. So again, there are 2 reporting requirements related to local indicators. First, the results must be reported to the local governing board as part of a non-consent item at the same public meeting in which the LCAP is adopted. And the second reporting requirement is to the dashboard, using the state board adopted self-reflection tools for each local indicator. Next slide, please. So as you're backwards mapping your LCAP development process, one of the things that will also need to be considered is the local indicators timeline. And so as mentioned on the previous slide, LEAs must present 2021-22 local indicators outcome data to the governing board at the same board meeting in which the LCAP is adopted. So if you have not yet established a plan on what data will be collected this year for local indicators, you'll want to do that as soon as possible so that you can begin collecting and evaluating the data collected. The 2021-22 local indicator data should also inform the development of your 2022-23 LCAP. So it will be important for LEAs to connect the local indicator process with the LEA's planning process for the LCAP. And also remember that the 2021-22 local indicator data that's presented to the governing board in conjunction with the adoption of the 2022-23 LCAP will also need to be submitted in the fall of 2022 for the 2022 dashboard. And CDE anticipates that the 2022 dashboard reporting window will open in late August and close at the end of September. Next slide, please. So again, as previously mentioned, the local indicator data should inform the development of the LCAP. And this slide just highlights the sections of the LCAP where the local indicator data would be included or inform the development process. There are some sections of the LCAP in which the instructions explicitly reference local indicator data. So for example, in the plan summary section, the local indicators are explicitly referenced in the instructions for the reflections on successes and identified need. The goals and actions section also explicitly references local indicators in the instructions. Local indicator data can also inform the feedback from educational partners, as well as the identification of needs, progress, and effectiveness in both the goals and actions and the increased or improved services sections. Next slide, please. So to support your work with the local indicator process, we just wanted to highlight some available CDE resources. So the CDE hosted a Tuesday at 2 webinar on January 11th to provide information on the dashboard local indicator process. And we've included the link to the CDE's PowerPoint from the webinar on this slide. We've also included a link to the CDE Local Indicators webpage, which provides additional information and resources on the local indicators, including the self-reflection tools. And that concludes my section. So now I will turn it back over to Adrienne.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, now we're down to the last part of today's presentation. So as we wrap up today's day one of our two-part workshop, we just want to talk briefly about the timeline and the approval process. So here is the LCAP timeline for the development of your LCAP, as we are in the month of January. So here you will be preparing as you are now, preparing the one-time supplement and mid-year update board presentation and presenting that. At this time too, you can begin engaging your educational partners for the development of the LCAP. And then as time goes on, presenting to the PAC and your English Learner PAC and having your superintendent's response in writing to them, to these meetings, to this presentations. And then the completed draft, it's optional, but we do strongly recommend if you have completed your draft of your LCAP, you can submit it to us and we can take a pre-review of it and we can provide real vital feedback that can be helpful in any type of revisions or feedback before you take it to your board and you take it for those final presentations and public hearing. So again, the sooner we have it, the better. However, this year we really need it complete because as you see how some parts of the template are embedded within the other, it really cannot be done in isolation. So again, we want to offer that. Also, public comment, the period, again, you're soliciting input from the public so that they have an opportunity to give input. And then the legally required public hearing at a different meeting than the board meeting that is where you're presenting the local indicators to the board and the board is adopting the LCAP and the LEA budget. And then remember that once it is board approved, no later than 5 days after the adoption of your LCAP, the governing board of a school district shall file the LCAP with the county superintendent of schools. And then that begins the county office official review process once it's submitted. So when looking at the approval process, once the county receives it, the requirement again is that the LCAP is adopted by the local board by July 1st and submitted to the county within 5 days of adoption. So as the formal approval process begins at this time, once it's submitted, by August 15th, the county can request clarification in writing to the districts. And then within 15 days, the district must respond in writing to the request for clarification. And then within the 15 days of receiving response from the district, the county may provide recommendations in writing for amendments. And then the district must consider the recommendations in a public meeting within 15 days of receiving these recommendations. And as Bonnie mentioned before, this process can go on until October 8th. And so the county office has until October 8th to approve the LCAPs. And so because of the enormous change and of everything last year, many districts did, take longer to have their LCAP approved. And then just a special note that your budget cannot be approved until your LCAP is approved. So it's really important that, if you're writing it and you're part of the program side, that you really connect and you work closely with your fiscal side, because really, especially with this new template, it really goes hand in hand. You can't do one in isolation. It really has to be connected and collaborative. So many times we get asked, what is the criteria that that the county is utilizing to approve the LCAP? And so here are the three requirements that as county reviewers we have to adhere to. So one, we're checking to make sure that your approved LCAP is based on the adherence to the template and that you have followed the LCAP instructions for completing the template. Also, county makes sure that you have sufficient expenditures in the budget to implement the actions in the LCAP. And lastly, the adherence of the expenditure requirements as stated in the California Code of Regulations, Title 5, the 5 CCR. So again, these are what we are bound to and how we approve LCAPs. As stated earlier, with the submission of the LCAPs, all LEAs and charters will submit the 22-23 LCAP to LACO via our eLCAP system. So whether you use an outside vendor to create your LCAP, you have the opportunity to upload the PDF to our system, and that works for many. In addition to that, LACO has an eLCAP template that we also provide as a service so that it is embedded within our system. So just as update on that, the 22-23 eLCAP template is not yet available in the eLCAP system, but we anticipate it to be available in February, and as well as the eLCAP submission guide that's coming soon as well. And also coming soon will be the updated summary of legal requirements and the 21-22 timeline for the LCAP resources. These two will be coming out soon, and so we definitely want you to utilize these really helpful tools in developing your LCAP. And we want to please ask you to save the date. Part 2 of this workshop will be on Wednesday, February 2nd at 3 p.m. And at this time, we will take a deeper look at the following. We'll look closer at the goal analysis, the increased or improved services, the LCFF carryover, the actions in designing actions and the different types of actions, as well as the action tables. We'll take a look, and hopefully we will have the budget overview for parents by then. We definitely hope so, from CDE. And we will have our BAS, our Business Advisory Division, help us with that and co-present that part. And then we have our eLCAP overview, and again, we'll make available the resources of the summary of legal requirements and the timeline. We also have provided you the registration link in case there are others that you find that need to or should be attending this for day 2. And we will be recording, posting, and having available today's workshop. So we really highly encourage anyone that's attending February 2nd that they take a listen to and get grounded with this presentation today. And perhaps even you might want to have a refresher in that. Yeah, because we love LCAP, right? So We want to thank you today for joining us. It's been a pleasure as always, and we want to just allow you to place any last questions that you may have in the chat. And as always, we will give you the Q&A. We will get that out to you as soon as possible with responses to your questions. I do see that some were addressed as well, but again, we will give the complete Q&A to everyone so that everyone has the resources that they need. So again, we want to thank you, and we hope we will see you and on February 2nd. So have a great weekend, and that's it. Happy New Year.